Hi, I'm Andy Ellis. I'm the host of this show and a potential Green Party candidate for Governor of Maryland in 2026. I'm using this show to highlight interesting people and ideas that help me and you to understand what is happening and what is possible. You can learn more about the campaign by going to gogreen2026.com. Guests on this show do not necessarily support my campaign or the Green Party. They've agreed to come on to discuss ideas and issues. And of course, click the subscribe button on YouTube so you can keep up to date with this podcast. Hello, it is February 8th, 2025, and we are excited to do this podcast today. Today, we're going to talk all about Governor Wes Moore's 2026 fiscal year budget that was released on January 15th. Governor Moore released his budget and he touted it as a progressive piece of taxation that was going to tax the wealthy on their income, that was going to give most Marylanders a tax break, and that was going to make the hard choices necessary in order to balance Maryland's budget as we face an almost $3 billion deficit going into the year. Now, it's important to know that in states, we have to balance our budget. So it's not like the federal government where they can just make more money or take out an infinite debt in order to pay for things. And the state government money has to be balanced. So when we face a $3.1 billion deficit like we're facing right now, the budget is a difficult document. And so when Moore's budget came out, Jose Del Toro, who will be our guest today, we started looking at it and we started working on it and we planned our campaign response. And what we ultimately determined was that Moore's budget was too little and too late to face the crisis that Maryland has right now with the $3.1 billion budget on one side and the Trump administration on the other side. Let's talk about how it's too little. The first thing is the Moore budget increases taxes on just the wealthiest Marylanders. Only those who are making $500,000 a year or more see a raise in their taxes. And while this tax on the 1% is admirable, it is not enough to close the budget deficit. The second thing, let's talk about sales tax. The Governor Moore says that he is not increasing the sales tax and that he touted this as a tax break for most Marylanders. The reality of the question is that he is adding 75-cent fees to every delivery service, and he is using other fees in other places in order to increase the budget. While he may not be increasing the sales tax, he is definitely making each Maryland consumer feel a little bit more pain every time they make a purchase. He says that he's not increasing property taxes. At the same time, the state has increased their assessment of everybody's property taxes, even if they haven't increased the rate. They've also passed over $100 million of extra cost onto the counties, which are going to force the counties to increase the property taxes. Finally, Moore's budget is simply too little to account for the unplanned costs, like the upcoming settlements that the state is facing for potential or for child abuse settlement cases that is going to be coming through the courts pretty soon, and the impact of the federal government drastic slashing of the federal workforce and other things. Moore's budget is too little in order to address the deficit we have. Now let's talk about it being too late. One of the things that is important here is that in 2019, when the Maryland government first introduced the idea of a blueprint for education that would funnel $30 billion of money into public schools over the next decade, the budget people immediately said that we needed to raise taxes. They said, if you want to pay for this, you will have to pay for it with increased taxes. But Annapolis Democrats and Wes Moore were afraid of Larry Hogan, and they refused to raise taxes. So instead of doing that, when the budget people did that, and told them they needed to in 2019, they nibbled around the edges with little fees here and there that cost Marylanders more out of their paycheck every day, little payroll taxes, little surcharges, vehicle fees, those type of things. And over the course of time, they've eroded all the support that they had for increasing taxes at the time that they needed to. This nibble around the edge approach has left Marylanders angry and has left the budget still at a large deficit. So what does that mean? That means massive cuts. This year, Governor Wes Moore's budget cuts over $100 million from higher education. It cuts billions of dollars from public education. It cuts major spending for developmentally disabled people, and it has other cuts across the board to things like programs that help counties to attract and retain a local economy. Wes Moore's budget is too little too late. And today's guest, Jose Del Toro, who helped work on this budget for the campaign, or the budget analysis with the campaign, was born in Guadalajara, Mexico, and he was raised in the western town of Mayaguez, Puerto Rico, where he completed his bachelor's of science in biology. Now Jose is a Master of Public Policy candidate at the University of Maryland-Baltimore County. His research areas are aging policy, social policy, and its implications with inequality. Jose is a volunteer on our campaign team focused on analyzing policy and watching the General Assembly for us. Jose helped me draft the campaign reply to Moore's budget and has written a policy brief that will be up on our website. Let's go ahead and bring Jose on.
Hello, how's everyone? What a positive summary, Andy. I feel so much better.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jose. I'm so excited to have you here today to talk about this budget and to dive deep into it and to help folks understand, beyond the summary, what the nuts and bolts going on behind the scenes are. Before we get that, though, Jose, I want to ask you a question. What brought you to Maryland and what brought you to this campaign?
Well, that's a very interesting question because I moved to Maryland, coming from Puerto Rico. I came here to study biophysics because, the fiscal situation in Puerto Rico due to its colonial status. Well, education opportunities have grown slim in the island, so I moved to Maryland to study biophysics. But as time moved on, I realized that I've always liked policy more than the natural sciences. So I decided to why don't just go ahead and do the policy thing. So yeah, so that's why I'm here. I'm studying public policy at UMBC, which have been like a great career change. I'm very happy about it. So here we are. That's how I am in Maryland. So what attracted me to your campaign is, coming from my Latin American background, and my decolonial experience I've had in Puerto Rico, well, I think that the United States needs a multi-party system. I think that it's time to break the duality of the Democrats and Republicans. And I think that the Green Party is an excellent platform and an excellent way for the country to expand its political parties.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm so excited that we're able to connect and that we're able to work on this project. So you ready to get talking about the budget?
Let's get ready.
Let's do it. Okay. So I want to start off with the discussion about the status quo, where we are today. Can you explain Maryland's current income tax structure and who pays the largest share of their income in taxes and who pays the least under the current system?
Well, that's a very interesting question because when you look at the taxes, the tax are the way that the state has to create revenue and to pay for its services. And Maryland is a rich state. It has one of the highest median income in the nation. But when you look at the tax structure of Maryland, you can see that it's actually the lowest, like 20%, that it's paying more of the income tax relative to the rich. Like, for example, we have some data that show from the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, and they show that Maryland, the top 1%, only pays like 9%, while the lowest 20% pays 9.6%. And when you compare, and that was for 2024, when you compare it to 2018, we see that the rich stay in the same 9%, while the lowest 10% decreases from 10.5% to 9.6. So what is telling us that is that the rich are basically staying the same. Even though we have a decrease in the lowest 20%, we can still see that that is still a generator of inequality. And in every aspect of like in income inequality in this particular aspect. So the fact that the lowest 30% is paying more money, it is concerning because these classes, the low and middle class are the ones that are actually holding the state together, while the rich stay the same and they probably get richer.
Yeah, and so you talked a little bit about how this compares to other states, but so like what is Maryland like? Who does it compare to favorably, and who does it compare to unfavorably?
I mean, if you compare, DC has the most progressive taxation policies, and the worst actually state on progressive taxation is Florida. So if you compare like on those two extremes, you can find that Maryland is like kind of in the middle, because Maryland has some things that are still on the aggressive side of taxation, like itemized reductions and the elimination of the inheritance tax. So Maryland is kind of in the middle of of being moderately regressive, and compared to the USA, it's still on the United States, still most of its tax structure, it's still regressive. So what is that telling us is that the power, the politics around tax policy in Maryland is still concentrated on helping the people that have the most resources. And it's probably a political decision to keep it that way. That means that the people still don't have enough political power to actually change that tax structure.
Gotcha. And so that's how the income tax structure works and how it keeps inequality in place in Maryland. Other than income taxes, what are the other sources of revenue that the Maryland budget has that come from Marylanders?
Well, for example, they have sales tax, they have property taxes, and they have other sorts of taxes like the cannabis tax, alcohol tax, and all of these like little taxations. And that's the way that the state generates revenue outside of the income taxes. But mostly taxes are the way that states generate the money for their spending on services.
Got you. And so we have sort of like income taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, and like vice taxes, basically,
Exactly, yeah.
that are coming from Marylanders. Okay. And then there's also a big portion of Maryland's budget that comes from the federal government, right? How does the
Yes.
federal government interact in Maryland's finances?
For example, when you look at the fiscal year 2025, we have two types of budget, the capital budget and the operating budget. The capital budget is mostly focused on funding infrastructure, and for fiscal year 20, for this year actually, it's like $3 billion. And the operating budget is around 57 billion. So the total budget for this 2025 is like around 61 million dollars. But what comes from the federal government is $19 billion from the operating budget, which encompasses a 32% of the operating budget. And that is concerning because that federal budget comes mostly from SNAP, which is like to help pay for food and groceries and things like that, and Medicaid. So what we're seeing now in the federal government, right, is that there's probably going to be a decrease on Medicaid aid from the federal government. So that is definitely going to impact a lot of Marylanders.
So 19 billion out of what, 60 billion comes
Out
from
of
the,
six, yeah, yeah,
yeah. So
around 32%, depending on which capital or operating budget you're looking at. But it's a lot of money.
yeah. So taxes make up a big chunk of it. Fees make up a big chunk of it. But then there is, a third of it that comes from the federal government.
Exactly. And I was actually looking at a news that came out yesterday that they interview Governor Moore on this federal government dependency, and he was mentioning of creating these companies, this hub for life sciences, IT, and aerospace and defense, corporations. And what exactly are we doing here? Let's be honest, because he says that he needs like all of these corporations to come to Maryland to have less dependency on the federal government, and that probably to create like private sector jobs, because we're going to have a lot of layoffs from the federal government. But honestly, life sciences requires a lot of like water, it requires a lot of land, and it's a very skilled workforce to attract to Maryland. So how exactly are we gonna do that with life sciences when we have a lot of people actually moving out of the state? Maryland is negative in its population increase. Like, we're not increasing population, we're actually losing population. So there's a lot of things happening structurally in Maryland that are driving people away. And the fact that he tries to bring all of these tech companies like some Elon Musk like mentality. And let's talk about the aerospace and defense, like with what's happening right now in the world with Palestine, the genocide and things like that. Like, do we really want to invest in defense? Like, I it's just
And it's an
It needs
interesting
time.
question because we're already invested in all of those things. We're already sort
Yeah,
of invested in
yeah,
aerospace. We're already
yeah,
invested in life sciences. We're already invested in technology.
exactly.
And the sort of bet, I think it's really interesting to juxtapose that to the, 1/3 of Maryland's budget that comes from the federal government in the form of SNAP and Medicaid. So like
Yeah,
this is not like stuff that is likely to do well in the Trump administration.
exactly.
These are services for poor and working class folks that don't have access to it otherwise. And so, and we'll get to it in a minute, talking about how Moore's budget tries to solve this problem. But I
Yeah,
think it's important to know that we have a huge dependency on these sort of taxes at the local level and state level, but also a huge dependency on the federal government.
yeah,
And it's not just the budget that comes from the federal government. It's 10% of the workforce in Maryland is
yeah.
the federal
It's a lot
government.
of workforce.
It is the largest employer in the state and the largest employer in 8 counties. So we'll get to talking about those things a little bit. But I wanted to also ask. Um, a little bit more about this deficit. So I mentioned that there's a $3.1 billion deficit, and I think it only grows as we go out in the out years. Can you talk about the deficit that Maryland faces and what happens in the future if we do nothing about it?
Well, the thing with the deficit that the Department of Legislative Services estimated that we're gonna have like a 3 billion deficit by 2030. And it's interesting because that overlaps with a lot of structural things that have been happening in Maryland, like the aging population, like the people leaving the state. Like, even though we have like a high productivity metrics that say that for our state, when you compare it to the GDP as well, we are not growing as in the GDP, and the GDP is like a measure of the products and of the goods and services that land produces, and Maryland's GDP has been growing slow. So that definitely affects the deficit, because if you don't have enough productivity in these capitalist terms, then you will not generate enough revenue. So, and we will definitely go into the tax cuts. We're definitely gonna go into all of these cuts in services. So that is what's definitely gonna happen, because if you continue to increase your deficit and the debt continues, then you're probably gonna have people, especially like the private sector, are not going to invest in the state because they're going to think that, oh, okay, the administration doesn't know how to manage their money. So at the end of the day, what's going to happen with a huge deficit is that the poor and the middle class people are the ones that are going to be affected, because when you look at the tax structure, the rich people are going to stay basically in the same, and with the elimination of the inheritance tax, they're not gonna be affected. It's gonna be the middle income and the low income people that are mostly gonna be affected by the services that they have to cut to balance the budget and to reduce the deficit.
Yeah, and I mean that deficit is big, and it only gets bigger in the out
Yeah, it
years.
only gets bigger. Yes, exactly. No, and when you put it into the factor the Trump administration, which is very hard to predict, because Trump is a person that is very hard to predict and is very hard to work with. So the situation, the panorama is grim for the state, and that was something that I was not expecting, because there's a lot of things in Maryland, like a lot of like federal agencies, and you have a lot of life sciences things going on here. But it is interesting to see how we have all of these things, but we also have like a lot of inequality and a lot of societal things that can and affect the state and will definitely impact the quality of life in the state.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think you think it's it's interesting to understand that Maryland's economy is in trouble because it can oftentimes feel like it's pretty good. We're a relatively
Exactly,
wealthy state,
exactly.
but you mentioned some other things beyond the GDP, the migration outward, the slow or the low participation in the labor force. Can you talk about like what the general economic situation in Maryland is like? And then we'll move on and talk about Moore's budget specifically.
Well, the general economic output in Maryland is that in most of the top industries in the state are government, health, and manufacturing. And when you look at those, you can definitely see and understand why Governor Moore wants to invest in these particular areas. But how can you actually invest in this private sector when you don't have people to come in, and when you have a federal government that it's anti-immigration? So if you're losing population, you probably want to move people, like people from their countries, to move to your state to like substitute the population. But in this particular aspect, that is not going to happen. And if you're not being if you're not attracting like internal migration, then who is going to work those jobs? Like at the end of the day, like this is the economic panorama. We have all of these corporations. Yeah, they're good, and but at the same time, who is going to work it? How are we gonna substitute that population? We need population, and when you have like aging population in Maryland as well, you're gonna need younger people to take care for those older population, and also the expenditures for health, it's gonna increase, and that is something that we don't see addressed in Governors Moore, because I think that the budget for the fiscal year 2026 is most focusing on the now and is not thinking of the future. So the future outcome of Maryland's economy, I think it's gonna be bad. It's gonna be heavily impacted. Heavily impacted.
Yeah. So anything more you want to say about the current situation before we move on and talk about the specifics of Moore's budget?
Yeah, I wanna just like a little comment about the tariffs, because we've seen that Trump wants to impose a 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, and I just want to explain that Canada is like Maryland's top exporter. So if the tariffs were to come true, then at the same time that is gonna heavily even more impact Maryland. So it's gonna make everything more expensive in the state, and it's not gonna help our economy grow. On the other hand, that happened also in 2017 with Mexico imposing tariffs on, I mean, the United States imposing tariffs on Mexico. But what happened then is that they gave a 3 month, like, let's just give 3 months to see what happens, and we will revise if we're going to impose the tariffs again. And Trump is a person that talks a lot. Trump is like a chihuahua. So even though he says that you're going to revise the tariffs in a month for this particular year, what happened in 2017 is that they did not revise it. Like they forgot about revising it, and nothing happened. So what could happen now is that even after 1 month, nothing happens and no one talks about it. So let's see what happens. But I just want to like put that out there, that if this were to come true, this will definitely affect a lot of Maryland economy.
Yeah, and I think that's an element we haven't talked about yet before is
Yeah.
like if exports and manufacturing are one of our big industries. If we say our industries are the federal government, which we understand that's in real peril, and exports and manufacturing, and our biggest export partner is Canada. Like,
Exactly.
more difficulty we face. So,
How are we preparing? What are we doing now to address potential issues in the future?
yeah, and I mean, I think you and I know that when we looked at Governor Moore's budget, it doesn't feel like it does that. But let's get into that budget specifically and talk about
Yeah.
the details of it.
Yes.
So, can you explain what Wes Moore's budget does with income taxes compared to what we have right now?
Yeah, basically what he does is that he's adding a new top income bracket, I 500,000 and 1 million on income. And he's also reducing the itemized deductions and doubling the standard deduction, which are actually good. He is also strengthening the child tax credit. He is also increasing the taxes on mobile sport betting and table games, increasing the cannabis tax rate from 9% to 50%. And he's also closing on the corporate income tax loopholes. And he also wants to lower the corporate tax rate from 8.25% to 7.99%. And these are all good things. And you can see that 80% of Marylanders will see lower taxes or no changes to their taxes. So these are actually like good things in the way of having progressive taxation. But the argument is this. Like it's too little too late, because I remember a report from the Maryland Center on Economic Policy that actually said on 2019 that these things should have been passed before to prevent this. So again, it's a political decision not to have done it in the past, and I don't know if doing this now is actually gonna help in the long term because this is a different political climate and it's unpredictable. So we don't know if this is actually going to work.
So take all that stuff you just said. What is the is it a couple of questions on that? Is it gonna solve the deficit problem?
I mean, they say that it's gonna do it because it generates like $1 billion in new revenue, and there's gonna be like $1.3 billion in cuts. But you know what? This is all speculative. There's two things here to put into context. First, this budget it's not yet has not passed through the House and the Senate, so this probably is gonna change. And the second aspect of it, it's the speculative manner of it because he is betting on these corporations to come to Maryland, settle here, and create private sector jobs and boost the economy and things like that. But let's be honest.
So
Let's be honest.
the taxes alone, if I'm hearing you right, the taxes alone won't close the deficit, but the way that the administration sees the deficit closing is by creating all these data centers and this defense industry and this new economy that brings enough wealthy people in order to close the budget in the long time. But without that, it doesn't solve the problem.
Correct, exactly. That's what I predict. There are good things in the budget, but I don't see how this is going to help because if you're cutting services and Medicaid is going to suffer cuts as well. So we're impacting a lot of people and families because when you impact an individual, you impact the family. And how is that going to help generate income? How are you going to help people, first of all, have social mobility? That is not impacted here. So there's structural issues in the state and in the country that are not actually being addressed in the in the budget. The taxes alone cannot solve everything.
Tax increases on just the 1%, reducing corporate taxes, right? Like
Eliminating the inheritance tax.
yeah,
So
right,
let's
exactly.
be honest.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, so you say that Governor Moore promises that every Marylander is going to either stay the same in their taxes or have a tax cut in their income taxes as a result of these policies. How much is each Marylander likely to get, according to the Moore administration? How much is the tax cut for each person likely to be?
Well, it depends. That is a kind of hard question to answer because it depends on the income of how each person does it. I mean, since you're gonna reduce the itemized portion of the deductions, I mean, it's going to depend a lot on the person that's actually doing the income in that particular aspect. But what I can do say is that when you have like 8% of the federal workforce of the workforce here in the state, and you're going to see that being impacted, I mean, a lot of things can happen, and it's just a lot of speculative. Are we going to see an increase in revenue? We don't know because I don't know. Honestly, it's
Right.
we're working on unknowns.
Exactly. And I think what was it that the Moore administration said on this, that most Marylanders would save between $150 and $300 or something like that. Like they're speculating on that, but that is not a stunningly large, middle class, working class tax break.
That is nothing. That basically is to say zero. That is 1 month or that's like 2 weeks of groceries.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, it feels underwhelming to given the economic difficulty that we're facing. So
It's all about illusions. You create the illusion that everything is gonna go great, but honestly, when you look in depth, it's everything. It's just bad.
yeah. So where else? Like if the taxes on the 1% alone are not enough to get the revenue, what are some of the other things that he's doing in order to get revenue in this budget?
I mean, he's shifting some costs to the local governments, so that is definitely going to impact a lot of people. There's a lot of cuts. Like he's going to cut $235 million to the Developmental Disabilities Administration. He's going to cut funding to the Maryland's Blueprint, which we know is an excellent plan to fund like education, particularly K to 12 education in the state. And he's also gonna do, and this is actually good, it's like, no, this is actually not good. He's gonna put a cap on the child scholarship, scholarship that's basically like childcare for people, for working families and things like that. So how are you gonna have people move in the state if you're putting like complications for childcare? We both know that if you have a working family, they need like childcare is very expensive. You need to help people with that if you want to keep that. If you want to keep them working for starters and reduce gender inequality, and also if you want to have attract families to stay in Maryland.
So
So
so he's cutting higher education, he's cutting K-12
exactly.
education, he's cutting development disability, and
Yeah.
he's cutting child care funding.
Exactly, and to put some money on the higher education cuts, it's a 4.6 decrease, which basically translates to $105 million cuts to the University of Maryland system. So again, we go back to what he wants to do in Maryland. How are you gonna cut money on public education, K to 12, and on higher education? Shouldn't we be investing in education for our people so they can live, stay in the state, and be a productive workforce after they graduate? Shouldn't we allow our college students to have a job after they graduate?
Yeah, and you know what? One thing that's interesting here is I was in Frederick last weekend, and I heard that the Frederick Community College, which has a child care center
In community college.
for people who work at the community college but are also
Yeah,
in the community, is having to shut the doors and having to shut the doors in March. And the
yeah,
reason is because the fiscal climate that we have right now no longer is allowing them to pay for it,
yeah,
because they're not able to attract enough people of means to allow them to provide the service at a reduced cost to other folks. And you know, that type of thing, I don't know that Moore is directly signing away the funding for that program, but these type of cuts you're talking about definitely have downstream effects on people that are trying to run, you know, low-cost childcare out of a community college, so that people can go back and get re-engaged in the workforce, so that people can use the valuable pieces that community colleges have in order to have that sort of economic mobility that you were talking about
exactly.
earlier. And so we're already seeing, even before this budget passes, we're already
Yeah.
seeing the effects of this on working families.
Well, exactly. And when you talk about like the shifting costs to the counties, you can there's like $144 million that it's cost shifted from the state to the county. So again, we go back to like, are you really trying to make Maryland like an attractive state for people to move here and solve our losing population and boost economic growth? Are we actually reducing the inequality in gender, in race, in every aspect of inequality? Honestly, not. And honestly, yesterday the Republicans were saying that they're gonna like tweak the budget to include more cuts because of the federal government unknowns of what the Trump administration can do. So it's definitely not looking good. And for example, we already have one, the U.S. aid elimination of the agency. I don't know if it's completely eliminated, but I know from experience that there's people that are being furloughed. So we're already starting to feel the changes in the federal government and the change in the workforce, and that is definitely going to impact the state's revenues.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the other thing about that is, you know, um, more seemingly is not doing much to stop the mass deportation that the Trump administration
Demand.
is also pursuing. And so you're going to see this thing where up to 5% of Marylanders, up to 5% of Maryland taxpayers are going to be deported, and
Yeah,
like that's going to have an economic impact too. And obviously, we shouldn't talk about immigration just in terms of its economic impact. We should
yeah,
talk about the impact that has on real people and real families and real communities. But it does also have an economic impact because most immigrants are paying taxes.
exactly. And they do essential jobs as well. They're part of the economic growth. They're part of the economic productivity of the state. So it's not looking good, man.
Right. And I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that Maryland learned from its run at mass incarceration at various points was that when you take a lot of people out of a community, you're taking people who are buying things out of that community, you're taking people who own things out of that community, you're taking people who work, you're taking people who hire folks, you're taking all of that stuff out. And now when we look back at the mostly Black communities in Baltimore and Prince George's County and a couple of other places that bore the brunt of that economic warfare during the war on drugs, we see that like their economies have never recovered. Like, not even talking about the folks who were incarcerated, but the community that those folks were in was devastated. And that's going to happen with immigrant communities when Moore stands aside and let Trump deport our neighbors.
Exactly, and that also affects the small business development because those small businesses are within their own communities, and those things are also going to get impacted. I mean, if you look at Mount Vernon, like Mount Vernon has a lot of like small businesses here in Baltimore City. So that is, and also we have like a Latino neighborhood here in Baltimore City as well. So if you take a lot of those people out, most of the small businesses that are there are going to suffer. It's listen, this is not looking good, and the budget is not trying to like fix any of that. And when you see him talk, he's not also trying to like say, he's not shifting. That is what, that one thing that bothers me is that he's not adapting. He's like hardcore on these things and this and that. Listen, I know your consultants and I know like the people you work around, you have told you that this is good. But honestly, we need to be flexible at that and actually tackle the structural issues that put us in this spot.
Yeah, and I think I want to get in a second. Sorry, I want to get and talk about what we should do and the larger structural issues. But you've mentioned Moore's attempts to grow the economy by attracting certain businesses here and certain sectors here. Can you talk a little bit more about the specifics of that?
Yeah, for example, one of the major things is like reducing the corporate tax rate from 8.25 to 7.99. And he also wanted to eliminate it's the way that corporates file taxes. It's like a watershed aspect of it that it's gonna make them file jointly, which is good. I think that's a good thing. And the reduction of the corporate rates is definitely gonna be attractive. But if you look at the market and capitalism and things like that, how are you gonna track all of these life sciences, all of these cyber, how he mentioned it in the budget, IT, defense, like how are you actually gonna make them attractive for the state when you have probably when you have in New Jersey you have a hub for pharmaceuticals? Do you wanna attract a lot of pharmaceuticals to the state? And those state and those companies require a lot of resources, so it's not like putting like a convenience store. It requires a lot of investment, a lot of material resource, natural resources, and it's not an easy thing to do. And you know, I don't think a pharmaceutical moves here in like 6 months and they start a huge large scale operation. Also, let's be honest, it's just a bad strategy. I understand that in the capitalist mindset, you wanna invest, you wanna grow the private sector because they pay good jobs, they help grow the economy, they pay their tax rates and things like that, and their taxes. But it's just it feels like an illusion because you're trying to sell all of these high tech technological neo Maryland thing, and it's just not there. Like you cannot make a Silicon Valley in Maryland if that is what the mentality is. No, it's not.
Right, and it's he says he's focused on bringing AI and quantum computing and all of that stuff. What he really
Quantum
means is
computing.
right, like what he really means is he's focused on bringing data centers for those things.
Yeah.
And we're not going to have Microsoft here. We're not going to have Apple here. We're going to have nuclear powered data centers from Microsoft and Apple that employ like 5 people after they're built and have massive structural strain on counties' budgets, on their resources, on their firefighting, on their police, on their electricity sector. And it feels like it is, I think illusion is a good way to put it. Like none of these sectors are bad. And if they want to locate in Maryland, they should. Many of them are already located in Maryland, but this sort of like, quarter point cut to the corporate taxes, and maybe like 150 million dollars of investment in trying to build
Yeah,
these industries. It's like it's not enough
it's
to
not enough.
structurally change the Maryland economy away from its dependence on the federal government and toward something different, you know?
Exactly. If anything, you're gonna lose revenue by giving these corporations a tax break.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So I want to shift to what we should do and what like and you know some of the more abstract and theoretical questions. But I wanted to
yeah.
see if there's anything else you want to say about the budget in particular before we move on to those things.
Um, I think it's important to know that this is not yet finalized, and we should keep an eye on the changes that the Maryland General Assembly is gonna do, and just remember to always keep an eye on these things because it's not gonna looking good. There's gonna be cuts to the Maryland blueprint, and I think it's important that we all have like a hawk eye on politics now because this is a very tough political climate, and I exhort everyone here to actually get involved in politics more because things are changing rapidly and we need to be prepared and resist.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so within the next 2 months, the Maryland General Assembly is
Yeah,
going to have to finalize this budget, send it to the
yeah,
governor, and get it passed. And they have to do that by the beginning of April because we have a
yeah,
90-day legislative session here in
yeah.
Maryland. And anything that doesn't get done in that time period gets
It
pushed on till
puts her.
next January. So, as Jose says, keep an eye on it. Our campaign will keep putting out updates about this. We'll keep the news flowing about it, and keep letting you know what is happening with it. There's a couple of things that I'm looking at in it particular, which is it is good that he is trying to get rid of the itemized deductions and go to a standard deduction. But it will be interesting to see if the General Assembly allows him to
Yeah,
do that.
exactly.
Creating deductions is sort of a is sort of a way that legislators can keep their specific bases happy. And, you know, so it'll be interesting to see if they fight him on that. It'll be interesting to see if they approve his funding
Yeah,
for new spending. And it will be interesting to see how they deal with the things that they don't account for in the budget,
yeah,
like the coming settlements from the sex abuse cases that are filed
yeah.
against the state of Maryland, which could be hundreds of millions of dollars coming this year
Exactly.
and are not accounted for in the budget. So,
Yeah.
you know, keep watching what's happening in Annapolis. They got about 40 days left in their session. We will keep an eye
Mhm.
on it, but you should keep an eye on it too. And if you have any questions about anything, reach out to us, and we'll try to help you get through
Yeah.
those. So, Jose, let's talk about what we should do. We've talked about why it's bad. We've talked about this inadequate proposal. Let's get to a little bit of like what we should do, and how we should look at these things. And I want to start with the income tax. What do you think the income tax structure should be? I'm not saying like give me actuarial tables. I mean, if you got them, you can share them.
Yeah.
But like, what should the approach be to income taxes here in the state of Maryland if we're really going to address inequality?
Listen, I think that we should help and aid the lower and middle classes more than we actually do now. I think that the rich should pay more money, and I think that obviously the lower middle classes should pay a lot less. And there's needs to be like a philosophical thing, a philosophical thought behind it. Because it's not like, oh, I'm going to reduce that and I'm going to increase that. No, you have to tell the people, listen, we have to work as a community. You earn more money. We need to help those that are in the most need because when you help the poor, it benefits the whole society. So you need to have a philosophical backing as to why you're paying more because probably the rich people say, oh, you're taking my money away and you're just we just have to break the American individualism and we have to start to see ourselves as a community. We are in society. We are all connected to each other, even if we don't know each other. And we have to start caring for us. We have to take care of our people in not only in our state, but in the United States. We need to change that mentality. And when you change that mentality, you will start actually to say, okay, yeah, take more of my money. I have a lot of money. I have less necessities than probably a lot of people in the state. And when you see that your money is being invested in actually like providing services and good and lift off people, then you will start also to like feel better, like, hey, I help that. We're helping each other. And I think that is one of the most important aspects of how you can justify changing the income in a way that actually helps more of the poor people. I mean, DC has a very progressive, I think it's the most progressive tax structure in the United States, according to the data. So if they do it and no one's complaining, that I know of course, then why shouldn't we just do it as well?
Yeah, and I think that's a good framing for it. Like I think at the end of the day, for me, the way that an income tax structure should be structured is it should have truly progressive tax
Yeah.
brackets. It should have a standard deduction for an adult, and it should have a child tax credit. And
Hmm.
and it should be enough to pay for the vast majority of the things that you're approving to spend money on.
Yeah.
And I think it's like I think you're right in that, like, it is good that he's increasing taxes on the 1%. It is good that he's getting rid of itemized deductions. It's good that he's stopping the child tax credit cliff. All of those things are good, but they need to be more. Like, we're not at a place where we can afford to just pay for this by taxes on the 1%. Like the 20% of Marylanders who make, $300,000 or more, like a person in this making $300,000 does not see their taxes go up. And
No.
like we are not in a time where we can afford to not tap those people who are doing well off. They may be in the 20% in Maryland and the 10% in the US. We've got to tax those folks too, because otherwise, like, everybody's going to end up paying, as long as we keep pushing progressive policy and don't have progressive taxation.
Exactly. And listen, on the long term, if the economy is going good and everyone's going doing better, then we can change the tax structure because everyone's doing great. You know what I'm saying? Like if we have less poor people, we have more people that can contribute more. And and that way we start to transform society, because I think that we need to allow ourselves to think beyond what we have right now. We have to have the ability to imagine, envisioning a society beyond this capitalist system, beyond these GDP metrics, beyond all of these things, and we should focus on our happiness, on our welfare. I think that at the end of the day, it's the most important thing. It's not about the metrics or the productivity or the competition of who is the state or the country that produces the more. We should just focus on actually like be humane about this.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's interesting because I think all of that stuff that you just mentioned actually speaks to a system in which income tax is the primary revenue generator, and that income tax should be progressive, right? And
Yeah,
I think Marylanders who live here, we live in Maryland. We don't live in Tennessee. We don't live in South
yeah,
Carolina. We don't live in Virginia. We have agreed to some degree of a social contract that we're
yeah,
willing to pay more to live for a state
yeah,
that treats people better. But
exactly.
like I think we have this thing that happens politically where we have like a rich Democrat problem, where we
Yes,
have a bunch of Democrats making $300,000-$400,000 a
yes,
year that are the base of the Democratic Party, and they are the ones who are stopping more and the Democrats from raising taxes on that group of folks. Like, it's when I saw that this proposal only raised taxes on people who make $500,000 a year and treats people who make $400,000 a year as if they're the same middle class as the person
exactly.
that
Yeah.
makes $40,000 a year. I was aghast, right? Like, we have to have a framing that understands who is benefiting and who is struggling in society. And the like early 2000s framing of the 1% is no longer sufficient in order to deal with the inequality that we have.
Exactly, and when you look at the theory behind it, it is theorized that neoliberalism, which is basically the capitalism, the stage of capitalism that we live now, it's it's an elitist takeover. Because if you look at the U.S. history, like it was very progressive with the New Deal, and in the 70s and the 80s, and when Reagan came, and after that, it has become elitist in the way that you have the rich people in control of the government, and you can actually and actually like Trump's um presidency is that when he was at his and the inauguration, he had Elon Musk, he had Mark Zuckerberg, he had Tim Cook, he has the CEOs of all of these ultra rich corporations. And that is what we're looking at. That is not only the Republican Party, but it's actually in the Democratic Party. And I think that Maryland needs to break the Democratic Party dominance, because if not, it becomes like they can do whatever they want. And that's what they have been doing lately. Like they do whatever they want. They try to make all of these progressive and taxation and policies, but at the end of the day, it's performative because they know that they're going to
Yeah.
win.
And I think what's interesting about that is the one person who can really break the dominance of the Maryland Democratic Party is former Governor Larry Hogan, who is thinking about running for governor again. Yeah. And they're so scared of him and they're so scared of him and their voters voting for him that they're not willing to do the kind of taxation policy and economic growth policy that they need to do in order to make sure all of us don't get pushed off the cliff. To get pushed off this fiscal cliff by the Trump administration.
Exactly. And actually, if you do all the progressive policies and you help all of these people, you would probably be reelected. But right. This is not a free consultation advice for the More campaign. I want to say that. No. But yeah, this is definitely, you just have to do the things right for the people, and that's it. And, and the thing is that when you look at also going again to the theory, in this state, you see that minority people, they feel that they're trapped in the Democratic Party, because obviously they're not going to vote Republican, but because of obvious reasons, but they're trapped. There's no more options for them, or they don't see that there's another party where they can identify, or where their needs can be met, or a party that represents their actual needs, their material needs. And this is why the Green Party is gonna be that party. We need to break this cycle.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think the other thing is, with the reliance on these sort of tax tricks and pushing costs to the counties, like, he can say all he wants that we're not increasing people's taxes, and we're trying to help the middle class. But every single person I talk to in the middle class or in the working class right now feels more squeezed than ever. Yeah. And they feel like Maryland is, adding 75 cents to their deliveries, 75 cents to their lifts, increasing vehicle registration fees, increasing all these other tax, like all this nibbling around the edge, instead of making the wealthy and the corporations pay their fair share.
Exactly.
I think has made people really angry. I think people look at this and they're like, sir, I do not believe you when you say my taxes aren't going up, because I understand that my paycheck stretches less far, and that I have to pay more when I get delivery. I have to pay more if I take an Uber. I have to pay more when I do this, when I do that, and when I do the other. And I see my property taxes going up at the local level because the state government has made the counties like basically pay like 90% of the teacher of the teacher pensions have been pushed to the counties.
Yes.
And like the counties don't have any choice but to pay that. It's not like it was in consultation with the counties. It is just an invoice to the counties that they owe to the state, and they're going to have to increase property taxes.
Exactly. And that's why people feel trapped, because they don't have another choice to vote for. That is the problem. And they need to know that there's another party that is going to be there. But on that note, Andy, let's talk about a little bit about affordability, like housing affordability. Like that's another problem about like people leaving the state or actually moving to like more affordable areas, like in East Maryland, in the Eastern Shore. Like we don't have houses here are expensive. Baltimore City is expensive. We have a lot of abandoned houses, and the ones that are not abandoned, it's expensive. So who can buy a house? Like millennials, for example, Gen Z, for example, all of these generations, they're not buying a house. Like my generation, like the millennials, when I talk to my friends, no one is like buying a house. No one can afford a house. Who can afford a house? Right. It's just ridiculous.
And that takes us to renters. And I mean, renters in Maryland, like Maryland has the nation's leading nation leading rent eviction filings. We evict more people per capita than any place else. Evictions are soaring, rents are soaring, and there doesn't seem to be anything the administration is doing to protect renters from landlords who are either individuals or corporations who have the powerful hand here. And so what do you do if you get evicted, you're one of the nation's leading group of people in Maryland who get
Yeah.
evicted. And where do you got to move? Like, where are
Yeah.
you gonna, like, if I know some people who live in Frederick, where I grew up, who are getting evicted now and are worried that they have to move 2 hours to the west to Cumberland to be able to afford to get a place at the same rate that they were able to afford it previously in Frederick. Cost of living is going up, cost of housing is going up, and as the state has this sort of nibble around the edges policy around taxes and fees, all of that stuff is going up, and people are getting squeezed. And as long as that is the case, none of these corporations are going to want to come here because their workforce isn't going to be able to find housing. Their workforce isn't going to be able to afford to live anywhere near where they locate the data center that they're trying to
Yeah.
build for the biotech AI firm or whatever it is, right?
The biotech. Yeah, I mean, and on that note, you can talk about families. Like having a child nowadays is so expensive. Like
Yep.
raising children is so expensive, and that is one of the issues in his budget. There's nothing besides the tax child credit. There's nothing
Yeah.
to aid
Yeah. And I
families.
mean, look, let's give him credit. He fixes this thing where the child tax credit had a cliff before. And I mean,
Yeah,
this was a bad design of Maryland policy where if you made X amount of money, you got a child tax credit. If you got
yeah,
X plus one, you lost the child tax credit. So he has fixed that in order to make it so that there's a gradual increase and a
yeah.
gradual decline. And good. That's good. That is good policy. And we should not knock that, but we need more of that,
We
not
need
less
more
of
of that.
that. And that can't be the highlight. That can't be the only shining star of this that is progressive.
Exactly, and when you track like a child's like lifespan, like his career and his education, we need to also give the people the ability to have a job and stay in Maryland because that is not the case. Like eliminating funds for the public university, like come on, like cutting the blueprint. Listen, I know that the Maryland blueprint is a major a tall order bill, and I understand that it's expensive, but it's a necessity. It's not an expense. It's not an expenditure. It's an investment,
Right.
and it's necessary to have that. But you also need to create the conditions for people to stay here to get a job, a good job. And I'm not talking about a job in high tech, quantum computing, things like that. Listen, just paying a livable wage job. It's so hard for them to understand that. I don't know. This is just it's this topic. Honestly, it's this topic, dystopian.
Yeah, you look. Yeah, I think we could go on and on about this, and
We got
I definitely want to have you come back on at some point, Jose, and talk
yeah,
about the other side of this. What our
yeah,
vision for a fair taxation system is, what
yeah,
our vision for a solidarity economy is, how we
yeah,
get more growth coming from local Maryland businesses that
yeah.
we help to nurture, so that there are local people here owning those businesses, because those are the places where the Eastern Shore and Western Maryland and Baltimore City are going to be able to thrive, not from the quantum
Yeah.
AI, biocenter, whatever it is that Wes Moore fantasizes about, funding his presidential campaign. What we need is growth in those places
Yeah.
outside of the
Yeah.
places that are already doing well. And that's the thing that I think really frustrates me about this budget is it is still repeating the mistake of tailoring economic policy to the people who are already doing well. Like those new businesses that he's trying to attract here aren't going to places in Western Maryland that need the infusion of new jobs because they've all gone. They're gonna be in the same, Washington, Baltimore, Frederick area that all the jobs are currently in. They're going to increase the prices in those areas, and they're going to push more people out to those other places without actually creating the jobs in those places. So, Jose, we're definitely going to keep working on this. I'm going to have you come back on. We're going to talk about what a solidarity economy looks like, and how we do that. But I want to ask one last question before we go. One of the things that you have talked a lot about as you've gotten involved in this campaign is the necessity for a transformative vision of politics. Talk to me about what you think transformation is, why it is so important, and how we can begin using that to think about how to address inequality so that we can build an economy that works for all of us.
Of course. Listen, when I talk transformation in the political landscape and in everything, basically everything, it's the philosophy around it. The philosophy that we have to, like, when you talk about American politics and sociology, it's all about working hard, working for yourself, like by your own bootstraps. It's highly individualistic, and we need to change that mindset. Clearly, it's not working in any health aspect, and it's not working for our economy as well. Even if the US has a GDP and things like that, but that's a different scenario because that is also imperialism, but that's another conversation. But what I'm trying to say is like, you need to transform the way people see, you need to transform the way society in the United States is. You need to think, and people need to start thinking themselves as a community. We need to help each other. We need to lift up each other. We need to stop all of this competition, these unhealthy competition things. And when you think about, for example, the government careers, we listen. We don't need. We have to stop with giving the bare minimum. I'm just like working for a job. No, we need to like think in, particularly in government, we're working to better society, like better ourselves. It's all about solidarity at the end of the day. We need to be solidary with our neighbors, with everyone else. And when you have this mindset, this transformative mindset of helping each other and helping the poor, particularly helping the poor for the benefit of everyone, we need to help the poor first. And when you change that mindset and you try, okay, let's uplift everyone else, I can guarantee that we're gonna see a change. We're gonna be, first of all, I think we're gonna be happier because we're gonna be connected, and we are social animals. We're social beings. We need to communication. We need contact with other people. We're gonna be isolated in this individualistic mindset. And when everyone is uplifted, the economy is better. We're all better. But that also is a contrast to capitalism, because capitalism is also competition. Listen, we don't need to be growing 30% GDP. We just need to grow ourselves, our happiness. And that is the dream, to actually have better lives. We come, listen, life is too short. We come here to, obviously, to thrive and to better ourselves, but also like enjoy life. And I don't see people enjoying life. They're just like, this is not working. And that is a transformative politics. It's about solidarity and helping each other.
Jose, thank you so much. That is an excellent way to close us out on this topic. I really appreciate your work on helping us analyze the budget, your eagle eye on watching what is happening in Annapolis, so that we can tell the people, what's really happening. Jose is a volunteer for us right now, and we want to bring Jose on as even a part-time staffer. We would love to be able to help him deal with that cost of living that he has to deal with as a person paying rent and as a student here in Maryland right now. So if you are interested in helping to make sure that Jose can spend more of his time bringing this type of analysis to our campaign so that we can bring it to you and offer solutions and policies that address this kind of neoliberal policies of both parties, then go to gogreen2026.com, donate, and help us give something that allows us to help bring Jose on board full time, so that we can keep doing this work. So Jose, thank you very much. We're definitely gonna do more of these. I appreciate your time on this Saturday afternoon. And let's keep doing this work, and let's keep getting toward that transformative politics so that we can all thrive.
Of course, thank you, Andy, for the invitation, and donate, please. I need the money.
Excellent. One of the things that we didn't talk about in this long and useful conversation was what exactly it is that the Republican Party in Maryland is doing and what their response is. And I'm going to tell you, here's a few things that they're doing. They are cheering on Trump as he is trying to destroy our economy. They're cheering on the cuts to the federal workforce. They're cheering on the cuts to the federal funding, and they're cheering on the attacks on grants that are already issued to Maryland workforces and things like that. So when you see your neighbors start to lose their jobs, when you see your housing value decline because all the federal workers around you can no longer afford their house, blame the Maryland Republicans for that as much as you blame anybody else. They are also expressing this weird fantasy to move to Virginia and live under Glenn Youngkin's governorship, where they don't have to pay as many taxes and the corporations have free reign and there's less less environmental regulation and less care about poor people and less care about investment. Look, I'll tell you this. If anybody in the Republican Party here wants to move to Virginia, I will be the first one to show up at their house, help them pack their shit, and get out of the state. We do not need them here anymore if what they're going to do is to cheerlead the destruction of our economy and talk about their desire to move to Virginia. Goodbye. We'll see you later. Have fun. The other thing that they are doing is they are doing a good critique of Wes Moore on his tax policy and his desire for progressive spending without his desire for progressive taxation. And they are doing a good job of talking about the way that that these nibble around the edges fees and the strategy that the Democrats have in order to try to fool people is actually increasing the price for every Marylander. What they're not doing is offering a good alternative to this. They're instead offering like old, tired, unworkable solutions that nobody in Maryland wants, and they're trying to use them in order to galvanize or to capture a nation who is excited about Trump right now for some weird reason, and they're trying to bring that to Maryland. It's not going to work, and it's not going to work in Maryland, and it's not going to fly. The last thing they're doing is being cruel. They're being cruel to trans people. They're being cruel to poor people. They're being cruel to Black people. They're being cruel to women. They're being cruel to immigrants. This is their brand. Unworkable solutions, cruelty, and cheering on Trump's desire to destroy our economy. And the problem, though, is that people are mad and they don't trust the Democrats. You know, the audience is not slow. The audience is not dumb. They understand when their taxes are going up. They understand when their fees are going up. They understand when the cost of living is going up. And they understand that $150 to $300 tax cut is going to get washed away by the 75-cent tax on every single delivery that they do and their vehicle registration and everything else. And so the problem is, the risk is that in this moment where many people around the nation are excited by the violence and xenophobia of the Trump administration, that Maryland Republicans are going to benefit from the anger at the Democrats. And as Jose was saying, and as we were saying earlier, there's this reason that it is essential that we have more voices in the debate right now and more voices in the discussion about what the future of Maryland's economy should be. And that's one of the reasons that our campaign is running a petition right now in order to get more people on the debate stage. We need to be able to have this discussion on the debate stage during the governor's race in 2026 so that Marylanders can hear that there is a choice other than the Republican cruelty, cut taxes, cut spend, trickle down economics, or the Democratic approach, which is progressive policy without progressive taxation. They need to understand that there is somebody out there looking for a transformative politics that leads to a solidarity economy so that we can all thrive, so that it works for everyone, and so that we can grow together as a state and get beyond our reliance on the federal government and some weird tech fantasy that Wes Moore has and start growing local economies with local ownership. So go to gogreen26.com debate, sign that petition, and help us get on the stage so that we can bring these things to every Marylander, not just the folks that listen to this podcast. And look, at the end of the day, we're in a really difficult and really tough time right now. We need politicians and we need political parties who are willing to be honest about the difficulties that we face and the things that we need to do in order to get out of them. We can be in a better place in a decade. We can be in a place where Maryland is thriving, where we have local economies, where we care for each other, where we have transformed into something better. But we can't do it with the two parties that are on offer right now. We can't do it with the Annapolis Democrats. We can't do it with the DC Republicans. We need a green vision. We need a vision of a better world, and we need a vision of a better choice. So that's our show for today. Thank you very much. I'm excited to get to talk more about this stuff with you. Check out our website, gogreen.com. Check out our social media. We'll be talking about this stuff more, and we will definitely bring Jose back for more of these conversations because this was awesome. A great way to spend a Saturday afternoon. I hope you all liked it. Have a good day.